Jake Morrison felt like someone had filled his head with sand and his mouth with cotton. His eyes opened slowly, and bright white light made him squint. Everything hurt. His muscles felt weak, like he had been sick for weeks. The air smelled wrong too. It was clean, but it had a sharp metallic taste that made his nose burn. He tried to sit up, but his body would not listen. His arms and legs felt heavy, like they were made of lead. Jake blinked several times, trying to make sense of where he was. This was not his ship. This was not the Aurora. The ceiling above him was made of some kind of smooth gray metal. Strange. Blue lights ran in lines across it, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. The walls around him curved in a way that made no sense. Human ships had straight walls and square rooms. This place felt alien. Jake forced himself to turn his head to the left. There was a clear wall there, like thick glass, but it shimmered with energy. Through it, he could see a long hallway with more lights. On the other side of the hallway were more cells just like his. In one of them, he saw something that made his heart race. Dr. Elena Rodriguez was sitting on a metal bench, her dark hair shorter than he remembered. She was alive. Jake tried to call out to her, but his voice came out as a weak croak. Elena looked up and saw him. Her eyes went wide, and she jumped up, pressing her hands against her cell wall. "Jake!" she called out, her voice muffled by the barriers between them. "You are awake. Thank God you are awake." Jake tried to answer, but he could only make a soft sound. His throat felt raw and dry. Elena seemed to understand. She held up one finger, telling him to wait, then disappeared from view. A few minutes later, Jake heard footsteps. Elena appeared again, but this time she was not alone. A tall man with short brown hair was with her. Jake recognized him right away. It was Lieutenant Danny Cross from the Aurora. Danny looked thin and tired, but he was smiling. "Captain," Danny said, his voice carrying through some kind of speaker system. "Good to see you alive, sir." Jake finally managed to make his voice work. "How long?" he asked. The words came out rough and quiet. Elena and Danny looked at each other. Elena spoke first. "We think it has been about 4 months, Jake, maybe longer. It is hard to tell time in this place. 4 months. Jake tried to remember what had happened. The Aurora had been on humanity's first mission beyond the solar system. They were exploring a new star system when they found something. A ship. A big ship that did not look like anything humans had ever built. Then there had been bright lights and pain, and then nothing. "Where are we?" Jake asked. "We do not know exactly," Danny said. "But we are not on Earth. We are not even in human space anymore. The gravity feels wrong, and the air tastes different." Jake slowly pushed himself up to a sitting position. His head spun, but he managed it. His cell was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. There was a metal bench, a strange device that he guessed was a toilet, and a small slot in one wall where food appeared. Everything was clean and smooth, like it had been grown instead of built. "Who took us?" Jake asked. Elena sat down across from him, even though the wall was between them. "We call them the Greys, but their real name is something we cannot say. They are about 7 feet tall, thin, with big heads and silver skin. They do not talk to us much, but they study us. They take blood, scan our bodies, test our minds. Study us for what?" Danny stepped closer. "We think they collect different species. There are other beings here, Jake. Things we have never seen before. Some look like big insects. Others are more like plants that can walk. They have been here longer than us." Jake felt a chill run down his back. "How many of us are left?" Elena's face went sad. "From the Aurora? Just 4 of us that we know of. You, me, Danny, and Ryan Hayes. Ryan is in a cell down the hall. We have not seen anyone else from the crew." Jake closed his eyes. The Aurora had carried 23 people. His friends, his crew, his responsibility. Now only 4 were left. The weight of that loss hit him like a punch to the stomach. "What do they want with us?" he asked. "We are not sure," Danny said, "but they seem interested in how we think. They show us puzzles, test how we react to different situations. The other species here, most of them just sit and wait. Some have given up completely, but humans seem to be different." Elena nodded. "They keep testing us because we keep surprising them. Yesterday, they put me in a room with a problem I was supposed to solve. It was like a maze, but in 3 dimensions. Most species either give up or try the same solution over and over. But I kept trying new ways, even when they did not work." Jake looked around his cell again. Now that his head was clearer, he could see things he had missed before. The walls had small holes in them, probably for air. The lights in the ceiling followed patterns. The energy barrier that kept him trapped hummed at a specific frequency. "Have you tried to escape?" he asked. Danny almost smiled. "Every day, sir. But their technology is way ahead of ours. These cells are designed to hold beings from all over the galaxy. They have had a lot of practice." But Jake was not listening to what Danny was saying. He was thinking about what Elena had said. The aliens were interested in how humans thought differently. That meant humans were doing something the other species were not. "Tell me about the other prisoners," Jake said. Elena looked confused by the question, but she answered. "There's a group of insect-like creatures from the cells near the end of the hall. They have been here for over a year. They mostly just sleep and eat. There are some plant beings that can communicate through colors, but they seem to have given up hope. Oh, and there are these blue creatures that look almost human, but they have these amazing eyes that can see in different spectrums of light. Do any of them work together?" Jake asked. Danny shook his head. "Not really. They all stick to their own kind. Some species do not even acknowledge the others exist." Jake felt something click in his mind. The aliens had made a mistake. They saw their prisoners as individual specimens to study, but humans were social creatures. They worked together, shared ideas, built on each other's strengths. And if humans could get the other species to work together too. "I need to know everything about this place," Jake said, his voice getting stronger. "The guards, the schedule, the other prisoners, how the technology works, everything." Elena and Danny looked at each other again. Danny grinned. "Yes, sir. I was hoping you would say that." Over the next hour, Elena and Danny told Jake everything they had learned. The facility was huge, with hundreds of cells holding beings from dozens of different worlds. The guards came by 3 times a day to check on the prisoners and bring food. The gray aliens seemed to work in shifts, with different ones coming for the tests and experiments. But the most important thing Jake learned was that the aliens had never dealt with humans before. They did not understand human curiosity, human stubbornness, or human ability to adapt. They thought they had captured 4 specimens. They had no idea they had captured 4 human beings who would never stop trying to find a way home. As Jake listened to his friends talk, he began to form the outline of a plan. It would take time, patience, and cooperation from beings who had never worked together before. But Jake Morrison had not survived 20 years in space by giving up when things looked impossible. The aliens had made their first mistake by underestimating humans. Jake intended to make sure it was not their last. Jake spent his first week awake, learning everything he could about the prison. The place was bigger than he had first thought. Elena told him there were at least 12 levels, maybe more. Each level had hundreds of cells holding different types of beings from across the galaxy. The gray aliens came by his cell every day at the same times. Jake started calling them the Karathi after Elena heard one of them use that word. They were tall and thin, with silver skin that looked like metal. Their heads were too big for their bodies, and their eyes were black and shiny like glass. They never spoke to the prisoners in any language the humans could understand. On his third day, two Karathi came to take Jake for his first test. They did not use words or gestures. Instead, Jake's cell wall simply disappeared, and he felt a strange, pulling sensation that made him walk forward. He could not resist it, even when he tried. They led him through long hallways filled with more cells. Jake tried to see as much as possible while they walked. The walls were covered with symbols that looked like writing, but not like any human language. Blue lights ran along the ceiling in patterns that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the ship. Everything was clean and smooth, like it had been carved from one giant piece of metal. The test room was round with a high ceiling. In the center was a strange device that looked like a tree made of crystal. The Karathi gestured for Jake to approach it. When he got close, the crystal tree began to glow, and suddenly Jake could see images in his mind. The images showed him different problems to solve. Some were like puzzles with shapes that had to fit together. Others showed him pictures of different objects and asked him to choose which one did not belong. Jake worked through them as fast as he could, trying to see if there was a pattern. What surprised Jake was that he actually enjoyed some of the puzzles. They were hard, but not impossible. He found himself thinking of new ways to approach each problem. Sometimes the first solution did not work, so he tried another approach. Then another. After an hour, the test ended. The Karathi led him back to his cell without any sign of whether he had done well or badly. But Jake had learned something important. The aliens were not just studying human bodies. They were studying how human minds worked. That evening, Jake talked with Elena, Danny, and Ryan through the communication system Elena had figured out. By tapping on the walls in a specific rhythm, they could send messages to each other. It was slow, but it worked. "They tested me again today," Elena tapped out. "Same kind of puzzles as before. But I think they are confused by something." "What do you mean?" Jake tapped back. "The other species here, most of them give up after a while. Or they keep trying the same solution over and over, even when it does not work. But we keep changing our approach. We keep trying new things." Ryan joined the conversation. "I have been watching the other prisoners during my tests. There is this insect species from the level below us. When they cannot solve a puzzle, they just stop. They do not get angry or frustrated. They just stop and wait." Danny added his observations. "The blue creatures I told you about, they are really smart. But they approach every problem the same way. If that approach does not work, they try it again, exactly the same way." Jake thought about this. Humans were different. When something did not work, they tried something else. If that did not work, they tried a third thing. They got creative. They got stubborn. They refused to give up. Over the next few days, Jake paid more attention to the other prisoners during his walks to and from the test rooms. The Karathi always took the same routes, and Jake could see into many of the other cells. In one section, there were creatures that looked like walking plants. They were green and moved very slowly. Most of them just sat in their cells, barely moving at all. Some had been there so long that actual plants were growing on them. In another section were beings that looked like they were made of rock. They were big and strong looking, but they seemed to have given up completely. They lay on the floors of their cells and did not move when the Karathi walked by. But there were a few prisoners who were different. Jake saw a creature that looked like a big cat with 6 legs. It paced back and forth in its cell, never stopping. Its eyes followed the guards, and Jake could see it was still thinking, still planning. There was also a being that looked almost human, but with blue skin and silver hair. It spent its time drawing symbols on the walls of its cell with some kind of natural ink from its fingers. The symbols were complex and seemed to tell a story. Jake realized that not all the species had given up. Some were still fighting in their own ways. The problem was that they were all fighting alone. During his second week, Jake was taken to a different kind of test. This time, the room had other prisoners in it. There was the six-legged cat creature, the blue humanoid, and something that looked like a floating jellyfish with tentacles. The test was simple. There was a large maze in the center of the room, and each prisoner was supposed to find their way through it to reach a goal at the end. But the maze changed every few minutes, with walls moving and new paths opening or closing. Jake watched the other prisoners carefully. The cat creature used its speed and agility to run through the maze quickly, but when the walls changed, it got confused and had to start over. The blue humanoid moved slowly and carefully, mapping every path, but it could not adapt when the maze changed. The jellyfish creature floated above the maze, trying to see the pattern from above, but it seemed to get overwhelmed by too much information. Jake tried a different approach. Instead of focusing on getting through the maze as fast as possible, he watched how it changed. He looked for patterns in the way the walls moved. After a few minutes, he realized that the changes were not random. They followed a sequence. Once Jake understood the sequence, he was able to time his movements to match the changes. He reached the goal just as the walls shifted to create a clear path. The Karathi watching the test made sounds that might have been surprised. But Jake had learned something more important than how to solve their puzzle. He had seen that each species had different strengths. The cat creature was fast and agile. The blue humanoid was careful and thorough. The jellyfish could see patterns from a different perspective. Alone, each of them struggled. But if they worked together. That night, Jake shared his idea with his friends through their tapping system. What if we could get the other prisoners to work with us? He suggested. How? Elena tapped back. Most of them do not even seem to notice us. We start with the ones who are still fighting, the ones who have not given up. We show them that working together makes us all stronger. Danny was skeptical. The guards will notice if we start communicating with other prisoners. Not if we are careful, Jake replied. Not if we make it look like part of our natural behavior. Over the following days, Jake began his plan. During his walks to the test rooms, he started making eye contact with specific prisoners. The six-legged cat creature, which Jake had decided to call Hunter. The blue humanoid, who Jake called Artist because of the symbols it drew. A few others who still showed signs of hope and determination. At first, the other prisoners ignored him. But Jake was patient. He kept trying. Humans were good at being persistent. After a week, Hunter began to look back at Jake when he walked by. After 2 weeks, Artist held up one of its drawings to show Jake through the cell wall. It was a picture of stars, and somehow Jake understood that Artist missed its home among those stars. Just like Jake missed Earth. Jake began to realize that the Karathi had made a big mistake. They saw their prisoners as individual specimens from different worlds. They never imagined that these different species might find ways to connect with each other. The aliens had built the perfect prison for containing individual beings. But they had never planned for what might happen if those beings started to work as a team. Jake Morrison was very good at building teams. Jake's first real breakthrough came during his 4th week in the prison. He was in another group test, this time with Hunter, the six-legged cat creature, and a new prisoner he had not seen before. This one looked like a giant spider, but it walked on 2 legs and had arms like a human. Jake decided to call it Builder, because during the test, it kept trying to construct things with the materials in the room. The test was different this time. Instead of individual puzzles, the Karathi had set up a problem that required multiple beings to work together. There was a heavy stone block that needed to be moved across the room to a specific spot. But the room was filled with obstacles, and there were 3 different colored buttons that had to be pressed at the same time to open the path. At first, each prisoner tried to solve the problem alone. Hunter used its speed to dart around the room, trying to press all 3 buttons by itself, but it could not move fast enough. Builder tried to construct a device to hold the buttons down, but it did not have the right materials. Jake tried to move the stone block by himself, but it was too heavy for one person. After 20 minutes of failure, Jake made a decision. He walked over to Hunter and pointed to one of the buttons. Then he pointed to Builder and showed it his second button. Finally, he pointed to himself and the third button. Hunter looked confused at first. In its world, Jake guessed, different species probably did not work together, but Hunter was smart. After a few seconds, it understood what Jake was suggesting. Builder was harder to convince. It kept trying to build something instead of cooperating, but Jake was patient. He showed Builder again and again what he wanted to do. Finally, Builder seemed to understand. When Jake gave the signal, all three of them pressed their buttons at the same time. The path opened, and together they pushed the heavy stone block to its destination. The test was complete. The Karathi watching. The test made more of those surprised sounds. Jake could tell they had not expected this to happen. Most species in their prison never learned to work together, especially not species from different worlds. But Jake had learned something even more important. Hunter and Builder were both smart enough to understand cooperation. They just needed someone to show them how to do it. After the test, as the guards were leading them back to their cells, Jake managed to catch Hunter's eye. He made a small gesture, touching his chest and then pointing to Hunter. Then he did the same thing with Builder. It was a simple message, but Jake hoped they understood. We are together now. That night, Jake shared his success with Elena, Danny, and Ryan through their tapping system. It worked, he told them. We can get them to cooperate. We just have to show them how. Elena was excited. I had a breakthrough. 2. There's a female prisoner on my level who looks almost human, but with green skin and white hair. I have been trying to communicate with her for days. Today, she finally responded. How? Ryan asked. She was doing one of those puzzle tests and she was getting frustrated. I could see her through the test room window. So I started tapping on the glass, showing her a different way to approach the problem. She looked at me, tried my suggestion. And it worked. Danny had news too. I have been watching the plant creatures on my level. Most of them have given up, but there are 3 who still seem alert. Today, one of them changed the color of its skin when I walked by. I think it was trying to communicate. Jake felt a surge of hope. His friends were thinking the same way he was. They were all starting to see the other prisoners not as strange aliens, but as potential allies. We need to be more organized about this, Jake said. We need to figure out which prisoners are still fighting, and we need to find ways to communicate with them. Over the next few days, the 4 humans began to work together in a new way. Each of them focused on the prisoners on their level, trying to identify which ones might be willing to cooperate. Elena made contact with the green-skinned woman, who she learned was called Kira in her own language. Kira had been a leader on her home world before the Karathi captured her. She understood the concept of working together, and she was eager to find a way to fight back. Danny managed to establish basic communication with the 3 plant creatures. They were called the Verdani, and they could change their skin color to show different emotions and ideas. They had been prisoners for 2 years, but they had not given up hope of returning to their forest world. Ryan discovered that the floating jellyfish creature, which he called Drift, was actually very intelligent. It communicated through patterns of light that flickered across its transparent body. Drift had been watching the prison for months, learning the guards' routines and mapping the layout of the facility. Jake continued to work with Hunter and Builder. He learned that Hunter's real name was something like a growling sound that humans could not make, so Hunter accepted the name Jake had given it. Builder turned out to be incredibly skilled at understanding how things worked. It had already figured out several weaknesses in the prison's design, but the most important discovery came from an unexpected source. During one of Jake's tests, he was paired with a prisoner he had never seen before. This one was tall and thin, with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. It moved like a warrior, and its eyes were sharp and intelligent. Jake decided to try the cooperation approach that had worked with Hunter and Builder. But this prisoner surprised him. Instead of waiting for Jake to explain, it immediately started working with him to solve the test. It understood cooperation instinctively. After the test, the prisoner spoke to Jake in broken English. You human. I threnody. We fight together. Jake almost laughed with joy. This prisoner had learned some human language by listening to the guards and other prisoners. It wanted to work together. The Threnity's name was Vex, and it had been a military commander on its home world. Vex explained the Threnody were warriors who believed in honor and loyalty. It had been watching the humans for weeks, impressed by their refusal to give up. Other species they break. They forget home, but humans you remember, you hope, this good thing. Vex told Jake something that changed everything. The Threnody had been fighting the Karathi for years before they were captured. Vex knew things about Karathi technology, their weaknesses, their fears. Karathi think they smart, but they make mistake. They keep many species together, but they no understand. What happened when species work as one? Through Vex, Jake learned that the prison was actually a research station. The Karathi were studying different species to find ways to control them more effectively. They wanted to understand what made each species strong so they could find ways to make them weak. But the Karathi had never encountered a species like humans before. They did not understand human stubbornness, human creativity, or human ability to inspire others. They test you, but they no understand test results, Vex explained. You do things they never see before. You make other species do new things too. This scared them. Jake realized that the humans were not just surviving in this prison. They were changing it. Every time they showed another species how to cooperate, every time they inspired hope in a prisoner who had given up, they were creating something the Karathi had never seen before. A week later, Jake had his first meeting with all of his new allies. It happened during a large group test that included prisoners from multiple levels. Jake, Elena, Danny, and Ryan were there, along with Hunter, Builder, Kira, Vex, Drift, and several of the Verdani. The test was supposed to be competitive. Each prisoner was supposed to work alone to solve a complex problem. But instead, Jake made eye contact with each of his allies and nodded slightly. Within minutes, all of them were working together. The Verdani used their color communication to coordinate between groups. Drift used its ability to float and see from above to spot problems. Hunter's speed, Builder's technical skills, Vex's strategic thinking, and Kira's leadership all combined with human creativity. They solved the test in record time. The Karathi were clearly disturbed by what they saw. Jake could tell they were communicating with each other in their strange language, making urgent gestures. That night, Jake knew things were about to change. The Karathi were starting to understand that their prisoners were not just individual specimens anymore. They were becoming something much more dangerous. They were becoming a team. The Karathi changed everything after the group test. Jake woke up to find that his cell had been moved to a different level, far away from Elena, Danny, and Ryan. When he tried to communicate through the wall tapping system, there was no response. The aliens had separated all the humans, but they had made a mistake. They thought that by splitting up the humans, they could stop the cooperation that was spreading through the prison. They did not understand that humans had already taught other species how to work together. The network Jake had built was bigger than just the 4 humans now. On Jake's new level, he found himself near Hunter and 3 of the Verdani. The plant creatures had learned the wall tapping system from Danny before the humans were separated. Within hours, they were passing messages between the different levels of the prison. The news was not good. Elena reported that the Karathi had increased security. There were more guards, and they were watching the prisoners more carefully. Some of the aliens who had been working with the humans had been moved to different sections of the prison. But Vex had important information. The Threnody warrior had been placed into the prison's central control area. Through the walls, Vex could hear the Karathi talking to each other in their own language. Vex had learned enough of their words to understand some of what they were saying. They scared. Vex's message came through the tapping system. Big Karathi, the leader, very angry. He say humans make other species think wrong thoughts. He want to stop this before it spread more. Jake realized that the Karathi were planning something drastic. They were not just going to separate the prisoners anymore. They were going to do something to stop the cooperation permanently. 2 days later, Jake found out what the Karathi were planning. He was taken to a test room, but this time it was different. The room was larger, and there were dozens of prisoners there. Jake saw Elena, Danny, and Ryan for the first time in a week. But there were also many of their alien allies. Out at the front of the room stood a Karathi that Jake had never seen before. This one was bigger than the others, with silver markings on its skin that seemed to glow. Jake guessed this was the leader Vex had heard about. The leader spoke, and somehow Jake could understand the words. The aliens had done something to make their language clear to all the prisoners. You have been chosen for a special experiment, the leader said. We have learned that some species are trying to work together. This is not natural. This is not what we want to study, so we will fix this problem. The leader gestured, and the walls around the room became transparent. Jake could see into dozens of other rooms, each filled with prisoners. There were hundreds of beings from all over the galaxy, all watching the same presentation. Today, you will compete against each other, the leader continued. Each group that wins will be given better food, better living conditions, and more freedom. Each group that loses will be punished. You will learn that cooperation with other species is foolish. You will learn to focus only on your own survival. Jake felt his heart sink. The Karathi were trying to turn the prisoners against each other. They were using the basic need for survival to break apart the bonds that had been forming. The test began immediately. Each group of prisoners was given a different task. Some had to solve puzzles, others had to build things, and still others had to navigate through obstacle courses. The groups were mixed, with different species forced to work together. But they were told that only one group would win. Jake found himself in a group with Elena, Hunter, and 2 Verdani. Their task was to move a series of heavy objects from one side of the room to the other, but the objects were different shapes and sizes, and the path was filled with barriers. At first, the group tried to work together like they had before. But then they heard the Karathi announce that another group had finished their task. The pressure to compete was enormous. Jake saw what was happening. In the other groups, prisoners were starting to argue with each other. Some species were trying to take over, pushing others aside. The careful cooperation that had been building was falling apart, but Jake had an idea. He looked at Elena and saw that she was thinking the same thing. They had to find a way to resist the Karathi's plan without the aliens knowing what they were doing. Jake made a decision. Instead of trying to win their task as quickly as possible, he deliberately slowed down his group's progress. When Hunter tried to move faster, Jake held it back. When the Verdani suggested a more efficient approach, Jake pretended not to understand. Elena caught on immediately. She started making mistakes that required the group to start over. The Verdani, who were very intelligent, quickly understood what the humans were doing and began to help. But the most important thing happened when Jake caught the eye of Vex in another group. The Threnody warrior was in a group that was close to winning their task. Jake shook his head slightly and made a subtle gesture. Vex understood immediately. Vex began to sabotage its own group's progress, just like Jake was doing. The other members of Vex's group looked confused, but Vex was a natural leader. It found ways to slow them down without making it obvious to the Karathi. Within an hour, the subtle rebellion had spread to almost every group in the room. The prisoners were working together in a new way, cooperating to resist the Karathis' attempt to make them compete. The alien leader was clearly frustrated. None of the groups were completing their tasks efficiently. The competition was not working the way the Karathi had planned, but then something unexpected happened. Builder, the spider-like creature, had been placed in a group with several species that Jake did not recognize. These aliens had not been part of Jake's network. They were trying to win their task by pushing Builder aside and working without it. Builder looked across the room at Jake. For a moment, their eyes met, then Builder did something that surprised everyone. Instead of fighting with its group members or giving up, Builder began to teach them. Using gestures and simple demonstrations, Builder showed the other aliens how to work together more effectively. It was patient, even when they made mistakes. It encouraged them when they got frustrated. Jake watched in amazement as the aliens in Builder's group began to change. They stopped pushing each other aside and started listening to Builder's suggestions. Within minutes, they were working as a team. The Karathi leader made angry sounds and spoke quickly to the other guards. But it was too late. The idea was spreading again, but this time it was stronger than before. The prisoners were not just refusing to compete with each other. They were actively teaching cooperation to aliens who had never experienced it before. Every time the Karathi tried to create division, the prisoners found ways to create unity instead. The test ended in chaos. None of the groups had won in the way the Karathi wanted. Instead, they had all learned something much more valuable. They had learned that they were stronger together than apart, and that no amount of pressure could break that bond. As the guards led the prisoners back to their cells, Jake felt a change in the air. The other prisoners were no longer looking at each other with suspicion or fear. They were looking at each other with understanding. The Karathi had tried to use competition to break apart the growing alliance. Instead, they had given the prisoners a chance to prove to themselves and each other that cooperation was stronger than competition. That night, the tapping system carried a new kind of message. It was not just information or plans. It was hope. Dozens of species from all over the galaxy were talking to each other for the first time. They were sharing stories about their home worlds, their families, their dreams of freedom. Jake lay in his cell, listening to the quiet sounds of the communication network that now spread throughout the entire prison. The Karathi thought they were studying different species, but what they had actually done was create the largest gathering of intelligent beings in the galaxy. And now those beings were starting to work together. Jake knew that the real uprising was about to begin. The Karathi had given them everything they needed: dozens of different species with different abilities, a shared enemy, and a common goal. They had also given them something even more valuable: proof that cooperation was stronger than any force the aliens could use against them. Tomorrow, Jake thought, everything would change. The Karathi had spent so much time studying their prisoners that they had forgotten to protect themselves from what those prisoners might become. They were about to learn that humans were not the only species that could fight for freedom, but humans were very good at teaching others how to do it. The uprising began at the changing of the guard shift, just like Jake had planned. For 3 weeks, the prisoners had been watching, learning, and preparing. Every species in the prison now knew their role in what was about to happen. Jake was in his cell when the first signal came. It was a pattern of light from Drift, the jellyfish creature, floating past his window. 3 quick flashes, then 2 long ones. It meant that the guards in the central section had just changed shifts, and there were only half as many Karathi watching the prisoners as usual. Jake immediately began tapping on his wall. The message spread through the prison like wildfire. Hundreds of prisoners on dozens of levels all received the same simple message. Now the first part of the plan was Builder's idea. For weeks, the spider-like creature had been studying the energy barriers that kept them locked in their cells. Builder had figured out that the barriers were connected to a central power system, and if enough of them overloaded at the same time, the whole system would shut down to protect itself. All across the prison, prisoners began to press themselves against their cell barriers. The Verdani used their natural electricity. The rock creatures used their incredible strength. The floating beings used their energy abilities. Even the plant creatures, who had seemed so peaceful, revealed that they could generate powerful bioelectric fields. The Karathi guards noticed the power fluctuations immediately, but they thought it was a technical problem. They began running diagnostics on their systems, trying to find the malfunction. They never imagined that hundreds of prisoners were working together to overload their prison. When the barriers failed, they all failed at once. Throughout the massive station, cell doors simply disappeared. For the first time in years, some prisoners stepped out of their cells and breathed free air. But Jake knew this was just the beginning. The Karathi would restore power within minutes, and then the barriers would come back up. The prisoners had to move fast. The second part of the plan belonged to Vex and the other warrior species. As soon as the barriers fell, they moved toward the guard stations. But they were not trying to fight the Karathi with weapons. Instead, they were using something much more effective: numbers and coordination. For every Karathi guard, there were 50 prisoners. The guards had advanced technology and weapons, but they had never faced an organized rebellion. They were used to prisoners who acted alone, who were scared and confused. Instead, they found themselves facing groups of different species, working together with military precision. The warriors like Vex provided strategy and leadership. Fast creatures like Hunter provided scouting and distraction. Technical species like Builder disabled Karathi equipment and weapons. Jake found himself running through corridors he had only seen during his walks to test rooms. Elena was beside him, along with several Verdani and a group of blue-skinned humanoids who had joined their team during the final planning. Their target was the main control center. According to Drift, who had been mapping the station for months, the control center was where the Karathi leader stayed. It was also where all the prison systems were controlled from. They reached the control center faster than Jake had expected. The corridors that had seemed so secure when they were prisoners were actually poorly defended. The Karathi had relied on their prison cells to contain the prisoners. They had never prepared for what would happen if all the prisoners escaped at once. The control center was a huge round room with a high ceiling. In the center was a platform where several Karathi were working at strange devices that looked like they were made of liquid metal. At the top of the platform stood the leader, the same Karathi who had tried to make the prisoners compete against each other. When Jake and his team burst into the room, the Karathi leader looked down at them with its black, glassy eyes. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the leader spoke, and again, Jake could understand its words. "This is impossible," the leader said. "Different species cannot work together. Our research shows this clearly. You are acting against your nature." Jake stepped forward. Behind him, he could feel the presence of his friends and allies. Elena, Danny, Ryan, and Vex were right there with him. But there were also dozens of other beings, species from across the galaxy who had learned to trust each other. "You were wrong about our nature," Jake said. "You thought each species could only care about itself. But you never understood what happens when species learn to care about each other." The Karathi leader made angry sounds. "We have studied hundreds of species. We know how they behave. Cooperation only happens within the same species, never between different ones." "That is where you made your mistake," Elena said, stepping up beside Jake. "You studied species in isolation. You never gave them a chance to learn from each other. Vex moved forward, its 4 arms ready for battle. Karathi take prisoners for many years. But Karathi never understand what prisoners can become when they work as one. The leader looked around the room. More and more prisoners were arriving, filling the control center. There were beings from dozens of worlds, all standing together, all ready to fight for their freedom. "This cannot continue," the leader said. "We will stop this rebellion. We will separate you again, and you will forget these foolish ideas about cooperation." But Jake was already shaking his head. "You cannot separate us anymore. Do you know why?" Jake gestured to the crowd of prisoners behind him. "Because we have already learned the most important lesson. We have learned that we are stronger together than apart. And now that we know that, nothing can make us forget it." Builder stepped forward and began working on one of the Karathi control devices. Within seconds, the spider-like creature had figured out how to operate it. "Karathi technology not so hard to understand," Builder said. "Just need to think different way." One by one, the other technical species began taking control of the Karathi systems. The floating beings used their abilities to interface with the energy systems. The Verdani used their bioelectric fields to power down the weapon systems. The blue humanoids used their advanced sight to read the alien writing on the controls. The Karathi leader watched in amazement as its own technology was turned against it. "How is this possible? You do not understand our science." "We do not need to understand your science," Danny said. "We have something better. We have dozens of different types of intelligence working together. Whatever one of us cannot figure out, another one can." Ryan had found the communication system. "I am sending a message to every Karathi ship and station in this system," he announced. "I am telling them that their prison has fallen, and that the species they captured are now free." The Karathi leader made one last desperate attempt to regain control. It activated some kind of emergency system, and alarms began blaring throughout the station, but it was too late. The prisoners had already taken control of too many systems. Within an hour, the entire research station belonged to the former prisoners. The Karathi guards had been locked in their own holding cells, and the alien leaders were being held in the same control room where they had once commanded the prison. Jake stood on the platform where the Karathi leader had stood, looking out at the hundreds of beings who had fought for their freedom. But he was not looking at them as prisoners anymore. He was looking at them as something the galaxy had never seen before, a united community of different species working together. "What happens now?" Alina asked. Jake thought about that question. They had captured the research station and freed all the prisoners. But there were still Karathi ships out there, and there were probably other prisons holding more innocent beings. "Now we do what humans do best," Jake said. "We make sure this never happens to anyone else." Vex stepped up beside him. "Threnody will fight with humans. We will free other prisoners. Verdani will grow food for the community," one of the plant creatures said. "We will make this place a home, not a prison." Builder was already working on plans to modify the station. "We make this place better. We make it a place where different species can live together and learn from each other." Jake looked around the room at all the different beings who had become his friends and allies. A few months ago, he had been a human explorer lost in space. Now he was part of something much bigger. The Karathi had tried to study what made different species weak so they could control them. Instead, they had discovered what made different species strong when they worked together. Jake Morrison had woken up from cryosleep in a prison. But he and his friends had turned that prison into the foundation for something the galaxy had never seen before. A place where any being could be free, and where differences made everyone stronger. The Karathi leader had been right about one thing. This was impossible, according to everything they thought they knew about how the universe worked. But Jake had learned something important during his time in that alien prison. Sometimes the impossible was just another word for something that nobody had been brave enough to try yet, and humans were very good at trying impossible things.